welcome Colin. Thank you so much for giving this talk. Thank you, Colin.
The year is 20XX. You jolt awake to someone screaming and your heart pounds until you remember. It's just your alarm, a recording of your favorite VTuber screaming for content. You thought it was hilarious when you said it. Now, not so much. Groaning, you push aside your anime body pillow and slap the alarm clock into silence. As you sit up, a strange thought from a dream lingers in your mind. Something about destiny. No, not destiny, but a mission. You're going to create a website, a shrine to your passions. You're not sure how, though, so you look to the internet for answers, and one option in particular stands out to you. They say that WordPress, which powers 43% of all websites, lets you easily customize pretty much every aspect through add-ons called themes and plugins, without even needing to write code if you don't want to. Fast forward a few days, and you're admiring the masterpiece that you put together using WordPress. You feel it wasn't actually as user-friendly as they said it would be, but you got there in the end. However, as you go to refresh your browser, something unexpected happens. The main page is replaced with a blank screen. Is something wrong with the browser? No. You soon realize something is very wrong, and just then, a news notification pops up confirming your worst fears. Your site has been hacked. Nani? You shout at the top of your lungs as you tumble backwards and die in Japanese. Am I dead? You mumble while floating through the void. Is this where I become an isekai protagonist? No, a voice cuts you off. What the heck are you talking about? Listen, kid, you are the chosen one, destined to unearth vulnerabilities in WordPress plugins and make the web a safer place. You stare back blankly. You hit your head pretty hard, and your remaining brain cells are still trying to process the situation. The voice sighs. There's money and public recognition in it for you too, all right? Your ears perk up. Fame doesn't mean that much to you, but rent is due, and your instant ramen stash has been running dangerously low. So are you in or not? Sure, I guess. Excellent. Now go forth and slay. Before you can ask how, though, you're snapped back to reality, still sprawled out on the floor. Wait, so what am I actually supposed to do? Oi! The void remains silent. And so begins your epic journey to become one of the greatest WordPress hackers of all time. This isn't a self-insert, by the way. I don't even have a body pillow. They're too expensive. If you're wondering at this point whether you showed up to the wrong talk, well, I can at least assure you that I am a professional and not some hermit that they pulled out of a basement. This talk may contain traces of PHP, so if you're allergic, then that's totally understandable because it's PHP. You can just tell your therapist they're going to be reached soon. Now, you will notice on this list that there's nothing about hacking WordPress plugins because this is one of various questionable weekend hobbies for when I have time and motivation. But anyway, first I want to disambiguate what it means to hack WordPress. Usually when people say this, they're either referring to leveraging known vulnerabilities in specific versions of WordPress or the plugins and themes that are installed in order to compromise a particular WordPress site. Or they just mean brute forcing the admin's password to gain admin control over the site. There's a famous script kiddie tool for this called WP-Scan. But yeah, in the context of this talk though, we're specifically talking about discovering new vulnerabilities in themes and plugins, ODAs if you will. You can go a step further and look for vulnerabilities in the core of WordPress, but that's much harder and beyond the scope of this talk. Now, plugins are amazing because anyone can make one, but also they're terrible because anyone can make one. So it's not hard to see why there's tons of plugins on fire out there when it comes to security, particularly the smaller ones. And by the way, when I say plugins, I generally mean both themes and plugins. So why might you be interested in hacking plugins? In my opinion, this is a good way to build web security skills, including code review, particularly if you're more of a beginner, because all plugins listed on WordPress.org are open source. And even for premium add-ons, you get the source when you buy them. And I mentioned before, there's tons of easy targets out there. But what if you don't want to pay for a premium plugin to test it? I'll say this since I'm on camera. Make sure you don't get any funny ideas from Juliana's piracy talk earlier, okay? Anyway, if you do find a vuln in them, you may be publicly recognized for your work with a CVE record. Now, is hacking WordPress a good way to make money? For most people, probably not, unless you're able to find vulnerabilities at scale. So I suggest going in with humble expectations and consider it a learning experience when starting out. And finally, hacking for the dopamine boost. When you do find something, it's just like you've solved the CTF challenge, but in the real world. The CTF is just a collection of nerd puzzles, in case you don't know. Now, there are two main bounty platforms that you can submit vulns to. We call them bounty platforms because they'll pay you money for finding security bugs. That's called a bug bounty. And what they're doing is actually quite special in the bounty world because normally companies pay for their own products to be hacked. But these companies are paying for you to hack other plugins, other people's plugins, and they can handle the responsible disclosure process too. I'll put more details in the archive, but WordFence is the more beginner-friendly option in my opinion. Just trust me, bro. So how do you actually get started? Well, first you'll want a working test environment, basically a sandbox that you can learn WordPress and test plugins on. And there are many options for this, but these are my two go-tos. Taste WP is easy mode. With just a couple clicks, you get your own temporary WordPress site. The only drawback is that it's harder to interact with the underlying server, like viewing the file system, running commands, and most importantly, setting up debugging, which we saw how useful that was in Juliana's piracy talk. But otherwise, it's really fast and convenient, so I use it a lot. The other option is using Docker containers, which takes a bit more setup, but it's totally worth it. If you've ever tried to run a program and it just explodes while your mate tells you it worked fine on their machine, that's exactly what Docker was made to solve. Someone said, fine, we'll ship your machine. And so you have these isolated, lightweight environments called containers, almost like a virtual machine running on your machine. And it should run the same way on everyone else's machines too. And what this means for us is we can fairly easily set up a WordPress server in a Docker container, which we have total control over, so that solves all the drawbacks with Taste WP. You don't need to be a containers guru like Alexa. It'll be a good time, probably. Depending on how much RAM though, it may be slower than Taste WP. I'll put more detailed setup instructions in the archive. So now you have a working setup. You can start to play with WordPress and understand it better. And you don't have to learn everything about WordPress in one go. More realistically, it'll be an iterative process that could look something like this. Say we're reading about a plugin's features, and it mentions shortcodes. What's a shortcode? Well, according to the official WordPress docs, they're macros that look something like this. You create a page, type the stuff down here, and then bam, when you publish and view the page, it turns into some fancy content. And it's pretty easy to try out yourself. But then you discover that there are several user levels, and not all of them have permission to publish a page. So you go and read about roles and capabilities. And then you start to understand how these things can go wrong, like where might you, where you might find related vulnerabilities, like maybe a plugin enables a low privilege user to do something that they normally couldn't. Or digging further into the docs, you've learned that shortcode attributes should escape user input, or else it might lead to SSS. Very, very common mistake. And you can find real examples of what vulnerable code looks like because many of these are published publicly. For example, you can find them on WP-Scan's website. Sometimes there will be direct links to the vulnerable code. Other times you might need to manually compare with the fixed version yourself to see what they patched. And you want to take good notes while doing all of this. I can't help with that because my notes look something like this. But I'm sure you can figure out something that works for you. Okay, so now you know a bit about hacking WordPress and you're raring to go. How do you actually choose plugins to hack? There's no right or wrong answer. And you may find yourself using multiple different strategies depending on what you're looking for. But just to give a few suggestions, for many vulnerability types, the most efficient way to find them is by doing some sort of code search. Remember that most plugins are open source, so you could theoretically download all that code and search for vulnerable patterns yourself, whether it's using keywords, simple regexes, or custom rules and code scanning tools like semgrep. Obviously, not everyone has that much disk space to spare, but luckily there's this online tool, WP Directory, which will do regex searches across thousands of plugins in a matter of seconds. Just be careful though, because a lot of the data is cached from a few years ago, so you'll see code that doesn't exist anymore. Or the plugin install counts might not be up to date. Speaking of plugin install counts, that's another parameter that you could use to zero in on what plugins you want to test. Maybe you want to start off in the shallow end and build confidence by hunting in the less popular plugins, which are more likely to be vulnerable. Or maybe you're aiming for a jackpot with a 5 million install plugin. It's like a gacha game, right? Nobody's stopping you from pulling for those super, super rares, but it might take you forever to get there. Another way is to go after specific features. Because with certain types of functionality, people will repeat the same mistakes over and over again. For example, plugins which introduce new user hierarchies like learning management systems expect to see a lot of custom code around access controls which may be broken. Speaking of repeating mistakes, we start to get into meme strats. You may occasionally notice that a specific plugin developer is making the same vuln in a bunch of different places, and maybe they're not doing a great job patching them all. If you look at what other plugins they made, you may, unsurprisingly, find similar problems. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, and again, there's no right or wrong way to do this, but hopefully this gives you an idea of some things that you could look out for, and you'll get better at this over time as well. So suppose you then find a bug. Hooray! It's time to report the bug and hope you get paid. This part is pretty standard for any bounty program. You'll want to provide details on impact, clear steps to reproduce, and optionally some remediation advice. The people running the two programs that I mentioned earlier are experts with WordPress, so you don't necessarily have to go into much detail as you normally would for impact. For example, they already understand what the impact of an XSS in WordPress is, so you don't need to write paragraphs explaining that as you might for a different bug bounty program. If it's your first time submitting, it's also a good idea to double check the scope as well. You might save yourself some disappointment. And then from there, it's just waiting game. After a few days or weeks, you can expect to receive some confirmation of whether it's been accepted as a valid bug, if it's a duplicate, which means somebody found it before you, or if it's out of scope. And sometimes You hack them so hard that they just never recover, just cancelled. The devs have given up on fixing it. Whatever happens though, just don't get too fixated on the outcome, right? Just move on and keep hacking. You won't always be the first to find something, and that's okay. It takes luck. Don't get upset if it's taking you a while to find your first bug either. It's very normal to spend most of your time in the beginning just learning. And that in itself is very valuable, even if you don't find anything. And that's the end of this tutorial level. It's up to you what you want to do from here, whether you go on to hack the planet or not. It's choose your own adventure. These are my socials if you want to find me later. Promise I don't buy. Yeah, okay. Good luck, have fun.